That seems like appropriate music to introduce a sermon. Will you pray with me? Speak now, Holy Spirit, by the power of your words. May they have new life and new relevance for our lives as we live them in these days. In your many names we pray. Amen. Well, let me begin, of course, by saying how deeply grateful I am to be with you, how honored I am. I suppose every guest preacher who comes says that to you, and they should. I teach congregational renewal in 4 seminaries around the country, and you are an illustration in each of those classes. I have written 11 books, and you are an illustration in the last 2 of my books. I deeply respect the miracle that is this church, and I admire greatly Billy and Sherry and your staff, and love this place, so I am grateful to be here. We have a home on Tybee, and when we are here, we try to worship with you. You are sort of our church away from home, which actually says a lot, because when preachers get a Sunday off, they usually like to sleep late. And to be perfectly honest with you, I could have used a Sunday off. But when Billy asked me if I would fill in for him today, I was thrilled. I was thrilled because I love him and because I love this church. But I have to confess, I have another reason that I am excited to be here today. I grew up in First Methodist Church in Statesboro, Georgia. When I graduated from high school there, I spent my first year in college as the youth director of that church. At the end of my freshman year, there was a real shortage of preachers in the South Georgia Conference. And so I was licensed to preach in the Methodist Church at the end of my freshman year, even though I was only 18 years old. I worked my way through college and seminary as a student pastor in the United Methodist Church. Now, the last Methodist church that I served, ironically, is in the same exact neighborhood as the United Church of Christ congregation, which I serve in Atlanta right now. I asked for that last Methodist appointment because while I was in seminary at Candler, I came out, to myself at least, as being gay. I knew back in 1980 that when the South Georgia Conference discovered that fact about me, things were not going to go well. And when that happened, frankly, I didn't want to be stuck in a church in Ludowici or Rincon or someplace. So I asked for a church in Atlanta. You know, I've always thought that one of the greatest ironies of my life was that when I was ordained at St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Columbus, Georgia, I knelt beside a man named Jim Moore. They lined us up in alphabetical order, and so there was Moore, and then there was Piazza. Big Jim, as we called him, was 65 years old. I was 25 at the time. Jim was a second career pastor because he had spent the previous 40 years of his life in prison for having murdered a man. This is the irony. They ordained him knowing he had killed a man. They would not have ordained me if I had loved a man. At that time I hadn't, so I was safe. But, you know, I still think it was a tad ironic. Well, by 1980, I had met Bill, and I was in trouble with the Methodists. My last time preaching at a Methodist church was 1980 until today. That is why I am deeply, deeply honored and grateful to be with you today. Thank you for letting me come home. I am a part of the United Church of Christ. It is not the No Music Church of Christ. It is the most progressive of all the mainline denominations, the Pilgrims, the Congregational Church in New England. And so I preach every Sunday. I teach in seminaries. I consult with churches all over the country. I do that now because I spent over 2 decades in Texas. I'm sure that was punishment for something I did in a previous life. I went there in 1987 to become the pastor of a fairly small congregation of mostly lesbian and gay folks. And it was a very small congregation that in 1987, frankly, was literally dying of AIDS. Over the next 2 decades, by the time I left that church to return to Atlanta, that church had grown to over 4,000 members. And I preached for almost a decade to over 2,200 people every Sunday. I don't know, but I don't think there is a United Methodist Church in the South Georgia Conference that is as big as that. God seems to have a very unusual sense of humor, I think. I don't know. So that story kind of has a fairy tale ending in some ways, but that isn't true for most LGBT folks when it comes to the church. They have been abused or abandoned by the church and want nothing to do with it. My activist friends over the years have always wondered why on earth I'm still in the church. They are not alone. People wonder why you have stuck with the church. I sometimes tell people that I'm trying to make an antidote out of the poison. But sometimes I wonder if that's even possible. I watch all the wars in the Middle East, all the sectarian violence around the world, all the religious division in our own country. When was the last time you saw an atheist suicide bomber? I mean, think about it. We have to wonder why we stick with this thing sometimes. I have to admit, sometimes it is tempting for all of us to walk away. And all of us have suffered and wondered what our religion did for us, why it didn't make us immune from it, why it didn't save us from the struggles. We have doubts, disappointments. We want to walk away sometimes, or at least deny that we have been associated with this thing that has caused so much suffering in the world. Why don't we? Well, I guess our answer's pretty much like Peter's in the gospel lesson this morning. Jesus had told them that if they were going to live their lives successfully, if they were going to find true nourishment, it was going to be by feeding on Him. It is a rather strange Johannine Eucharistic text filled with obscure Aramaic idioms. There. Now, do you believe I actually went to seminary? I mean, that's what preachers do when they haven't got a clue what it means. And that's the truth. I haven't got a clue what this text means. I mean, we take communion at my church every single Sunday. But even we don't take communion this seriously. And so you go and read it in the original language, it doesn't help at all. And you read all these experts, and they don't know what they're talking about either. And so I look at this, and so the actual text, Jesus is talking about eating his flesh. And if you look at it in the original language, he talks about chewing on his flesh. Now, that isn't even getting any better at all. The English word that's best translated here is masticating his flesh. At least I don't know quite what that word means, so that's better. Now, he says this, and while I find it completely gross, I don't find it particularly offensive. His listeners were offended. So offended that many of them just went off in a huff. They wouldn't follow him anymore. Now, the truth of the matter is, it is my personal belief that if you don't find Jesus' teachings offensive on a regular basis, you are not reading it correctly. You really aren't paying attention to what he is actually saying. But this would not have been one of the ones that would have offended me. The only thing that I can think about is that Jesus is offering to nourish and nurture them. And what offended them was that they didn't think they needed it. Later in John, Jesus will say, "I'm the vine, and you are the branches. Life comes to you through me." He is offering to be the very life, the very bread of life. But we tend to think we can take care of ourselves, at least when life is going well. So they go off and leave offended. Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Are you going to go too?" And Peter says, "To whom would we go?" That is not an exact, resounding vote of confidence. Where are we going? You already made us give up this fishing gig. We don't have any nets. We don't have any boats. What would we do now? To whom would we go, Lord? Michael Coffey writes a blog. And what he tries to do is he tries to write a poem every week for the assigned lectionary reading. And this is his poem for this reading. It's entitled, "If Only We Had Better Options." "Do you also wish to go away?" he asked, and stunned us like electricity. And we whispered under our breath, "Yes, we would like an easier path, clear cut through the oak forest, something that at least made sense. Or, better, we wish you would go away. Jesus, you keep complicating and confusing us and messing us up so we can't think straight. If only we could have known you and heard your words that burn in us now, and never felt your spirit wormhole its way through us, right on into the infinite yes. But then again, before you, there was only the deafening, finite no, and the death trap of our anxious, breathless days. So no, we don't want to go away. Not because we have any idea where this thing is going with you, but because honestly, where the hell would we go? It is you ethereal brother, you who is so full of God life that every second in you seems eternal. That's the problem, isn't it? Somewhere along the way, we got hooked. We became addicted to this one called Jesus. He became the source of life for us. He became our cause of hope. It's almost as if we are addicted to his flesh. It is the bread that nourishes in us this ethereal, unprovable optimism that our life has some meaning, even beyond the sunset of our days. Yes, the church that bore me, that nourished me, that taught me faith, that called me son, that called me to preach, rejected me. Rejected me for who I was, and I wanted to walk away from it. But to whom would I go? A Scottish preacher in the last century lost his wife suddenly, and afterwards he preached a very personal sermon. He admitted in the message that he really did not understand this life of ours. But still less could he understand how people facing life could abandon, or facing death, could abandon their faith. He said, "Abandon it for what? You people in the sunshine may believe in faith, but we in the shadows must believe in it. We have nothing else." Philip Yancey, in his book Reaching for the Invisible God, wrote, "On my travels overseas, I have noticed a striking difference in the wording of prayers. Christians in affluent countries tend to pray, 'Lord, take this trial away from us.' But I have heard prisoners and persecuted Christians and those who live in very poor countries pray instead, 'Lord, give us strength to bear this trial.'" My friends, when life is easy and everything is a fairy tale, it's easy to believe in magic and call it faith. But when the teachings get tough, we need someone to turn to who can nourish us and give us strength to get through it. To whom shall we go? Because let me tell you something. Sooner or later, life gets tough for us all. I know none of us believe it. But no one is getting out of this alive. Sooner or later, we are going to need someone to go with us through that tough journey. So I'm glad you are here. I'm glad you are here for me. I'm glad you are here for you. I'm glad you're here for all of those out there who do not yet know that you are here for them. They need to know. They may think you are the enemy right now. They may resist you and resent you when you try to love them on behalf of this mysterious God. They may not love you back. I know, because I felt that way about the church and about the faith and even about God in my own life. Can I leave you with one last story? It's a story I read in a book long, long ago when I was a little boy growing up here in South Georgia. It's in Arthur Gordon's little book. You may have read it, A Touch of Wonder. I read it a long time ago, so my memory of this story may be, apocryphal. But let me tell you as I remember it. I like it because he grew up here, or he lived here on the coast of Georgia, down south of here on the marshy coast. He was home one day with his kids. His wife had gone shopping or something, I don't know. He was probably hoping to watch football or read a book or write or something, I don't know. But the kids wanted to go to the beach. And so they kept insisting, and finally he realized he wasn't going to get any peace. So he agreed, and the kids, the 3 kids and the dog, a little Sheltie named Tony, they all piled in a boat and they went across the intercoastal to the little island where there was a beach, and they all piled out and off they went. And he was sort of left with a few moments of peace. And so that was really all he wanted that afternoon anyway. But shortly, the dog started barking, and everyone ran off to see where the dog had turned up. And they discovered that a great loon had dived in after a fish and come up under an oil slick. And the bird was covered with oil. "Daddy, Daddy," one of the little girls said, "What'll happen to it?" Well, Gordon knew the bird would die, that it would either starve to death or become the victim of a predator in the night. "Daddy, Daddy, we've got to clean it off." "How are we going to clean this off? There are some towels in the boat." And so she ran back to the boat and got the towels, and they came back and they tried to wipe the bird off. But the bird was having none of it, of course. And so all they got for their efforts was a lot of scratches and bites. And pretty soon both the little girls and the little boy and Gordon, they were all scratched and bitten. And "Daddy, Daddy, we've got to take her back to the house and clean her off. How are we going to be, we don't ruin the boat for a bird and 3 kids and a dog. And Daddy, we've got to." So he throws the towel over the bird. They wrestle it into the boat. They take the boat back into the house. Well, he's really grateful by now that his wife is gone, because to take this oil-covered bird into his wife's bathroom is going to get him killed. But they go in and they try to clean the bird off, and all they get are scratches and bites, and But finally, they use this, like all the elixirs in the house and the alcohol, and they finally do actually get the bird clean. So towel back over the bird, back in the boat, back up to the island, and they take the bird out, and the bird gets out and preens its feathers off, and in a few minutes, it waddles over to the water and swims off to a sandbar where the other birds are beginning to roost for the night. And the dog and the 2 little girls go off running to find another adventure. But the little boy, the youngest child named Dana, stood there. And he looked down at the scratches and bites on his hands. And he reaches up and takes his daddy's hand. And he says to him, "Daddy, she would have died, wouldn't she?" And Gordon says to Dana, "Yes, son, she would have died." And the little boy's quiet for a moment, and then he says, "And to think, we almost didn't come." And I look around in a place like Savannah and people out there who have no church, no home, no place that can tell them, "Oh, no, that's not true. God actually does love you." People out there who will die without knowing that, unless you tell them. And to think this place almost died. I know it will be hard. I know they won't all hear eagerly. I know love isn't always eagerly received. I know this because, the other day, the hand of God reached down to touch me, and I noticed it was covered with bites and scratches, and some of them were mine. Amen.